to me, everything happened in the classroom. And because nobody wants to hear, oh, how hard I worked, or everybody works hard. And
Sure.
so I never said, oh, I work so hard. And, so I would always go into the schools, and I loved going into the schools. I mean, I'll be honest. I can't say that, maybe everybody around me was always in favor that I went into schools because there's stuff to do at the board. But I used to love to go into the schools, and sometimes I would, take over and do an exam. I mean, my phone would be dinging because something happened, but unless if the child was not safe, then I would obviously take it. But it's the relationship with the teachers, and all the initiatives that happen at Lester B. It's because of the teachers, because they believed in it. They would come. I created a culture of openness. You want to try something? Let's do it. I'm not going to wait for research, because by the time research gets there, it's too late. We
Yeah.
can work alongside, but not at the expense of. So when the teachers had an idea, um, I went for it.
Welcome to episode 15 of the Canadian Ed Leadership Podcast. Excited today to have with me Michael Chechile from Quebec. I wasn't sure. I don't have as many contacts in the province of Quebec, but I still do have some, and I was grateful for Michael's time sharing a little bit about what makes Quebec a different, unique place in terms of the world of education. But we also talk about leadership, and we talk about his role. He's a former director general, which is essentially it's the same as a superintendent. It's just the way it's just the Quebecois framing of that. But Michael and I have known each other for a lot of years. He's a very strong innovator and talks a little bit about, as you just heard in that clip, about the way in which he's established a culture to support teachers in that growth, and they continue to do that today, even after he's left. Today's episode, as always, is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnership, and excited to be able to offer these opportunities for you. And if you wouldn't mind, just do that little thing where you hit subscribe on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get this, wherever you find this. That just kind of helps out. That way, I don't. I try to release one every 2 weeks. This one was about 3 weeks late, but I don't think anybody was losing any sleep over it. But that way you'll know when the next episode arrives. And I have a lot of good guests coming up, so I wouldn't want you to miss out. But enjoy today's episode with Michael Chechile. Michael, so good to see you. You are coming from the province of Quebec, but I know most recently you were in British Columbia. And interestingly enough, I had on my show a couple of months ago Kevin Cardell, who is the president
Yes,
of
yes,
CASA. And so
great.
there's a connection there. So tell me a little bit about CASA and your role at that event.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's a pleasure and honor to be here amongst all of you today. It was, I believe, the month of March that I was approached if I'd be interested to be a critical friend for the conference, and I asked, "What is a critical friend?" And so I think that we were all learning what the term meant, but it has a lot to do with witnessing, and so you watch and you attend as many of the conferences as possible, and you speak to everybody, and then you synthesize, and you ask questions so that they can continue the learning with some of the guided questions that we put forth. There were two of us, myself and the dean of education from my University of New Brunswick. It was a great experience.
Yeah, and I wonder about that as being, an interesting idea to take forth in other events. Like, do you see that as being like, yeah, other conferences should think about having? So what could that look like? Maybe even in a different context, because like it
Yeah,
sounds like an
I
interesting nouvelle
yeah,
idea, right?
Absolutely. Having gone through the process, I only see beneficial things about it. The fact that when you go to a conference, you can't attend every session. So we're bringing in a synopsis of as many sessions as possible. So we would go from one session to another, sometimes 30 minutes. That's one thing. But I think it's also great to wrap it up and to validate if we've all learned the same thing. What I loved about it is I've always mentioned that regardless of the province, regardless of the language, the political aspects, we all want what's best for the children. So there's always a commonality. And that's the piece I love. And it's I think it would be beneficial at any event, um, because as I'd mentioned, because of the synthesizing, bringing everything together. I think it's an amazing experience.
Yeah, and again, your perspective is slightly different than those who attending who are now, all active and current school leaders across Canada, and so maybe let's just back up a little bit and find out a
Sure.
little bit more about your context. I remember meeting you for the first time. Do you remember the first time we met, Michael?
Was it? We've met many times, but what is it?
Yes.
Was it a Lester B?
No, it was in
Oh,
Chicago. It was in
oh, in
Chicago.
Chicago.
Yes, you had
Okay.
come. You had come. I don't know if you were on work or whatever, but again, when I was working with Discovery, we had invited you to,
Yes.
I think, invited you to
Yes.
our offices there, and I happened to be there at the
Yes.
time, and so we talked a
Yes.
little bit about things that were happening in Lester B, and
Yeah.
at that time you were not director general. You were working with underneath that, but you were soon to be
Great.
that role. But anyway,
Great.
that was first time.
Great.
That was first time we met. But
Oh,
yes, we
okay.
have met
Wow.
several times before that. But I remember that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just maybe for folks who aren't as familiar with your background and context, just share a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a first generation Italian. My parents were from Italy, so first generation Italian immigrant, and grew up in the eastern part of the island. Now I live on the western part, and I've always been interested in education. But 30 some years ago, I was discouraged to go into education because there were no jobs, and so I tried everything else. I think I don't know how many programs I went into, and then I went traveling for a year, and I said no, it's education that I want, and I came back and went to McGill, got my degree, and I was a teacher. I was a technology consultant. I was a vice principal, director of educational services, director of educational services and IT, and then finished that part of my career as director general, which is equivalent to superintendent. At the same time, I've always had my foot in with Concordia, so I've been teaching there for many years, except when I was a director general, and now I'm back in Concordia, uh, just helping, questioning what education uh, is all about and how we can always move forward.
Well, thank and our the what I've tried to create with this show is to help people see leadership across Canada and similarities and differences, and as I think you probably can attest to, we have so much in common. Like that's really
Absolutely, yeah.
the majority of it. However, it's always kind
Yeah.
of interesting to dig in and find out, well, how do you do things a little differently? And coming from the province of Quebec, the rest of Canada and the rest of the world understands it is very unique in so many ways. Obviously, language being the sort of the primary difference, but culturally, uh, things are just slightly different. So I don't know. Again, that's where you've grown up, that's where you've done it, but you also have had a number of experiences outside. So I don't know. How can you in any way sort of help people understand maybe the nuances of what makes Quebec education, K-12, K-13 education slightly different than it might be in other parts of Canada or the world?
Wonderful, sure. We only go to grade 11.
Oh, grade 11.
And
Sorry. I was thinking grade 13 used to be Toronto, Ontario. I don't even think they do that
that's right.
anymore. Maybe they do, but grade
It,
11. That's interesting. Yes.
grade 11, and then we have 2 years of we call it CEGEP, which is mandatory if you want to go into higher learning, which is university. It's a great question that you've asked us because uh, see we've been working with a curriculum reform um, uh, for over 20 some years, and I believe in many ways the curriculum was ahead of its time because it dealt with competencies and not with with end product or end learning. So as a I mean as a student, I went through a very very generic, very traditional learning, but uh, as a teacher, a principal, and whatnot, I think the curriculum here is absolutely amazing. Um, is it being always used is another question. It's easier to implement a competency based curriculum in elementary um, more than it is in high school. But I think that we also have challenges here. As great as the curriculum is, we still do have ministerial exams in grade 10 and 11, and I know that often we hear that we shouldn't be teaching to the subject, but I understand also, the pressure that educators get because if they don't pass these exams, then they don't go on to higher learning. So and then there's the English and the French. So um, I I worked in an English school board. However, we don't have full English schools. They're all immersion schools
Right.
or bilingual schools. There's in our board we don't have English schools. Um, so there's that we we have to deal with. But see, um, I because we only make up about 10%. The English school boards only make up 10% of the of the educational population in Quebec, and we do very well. Our success rates are very high, and I believe that we're also big in innovation. We try different things. Where with the French board, sometimes the philosophy is a little bit different. Maybe it's a little bit more hierarchical, but I've worked with them, especially since my retirement, and a joy to work with, and they're also very open to innovation and everything else. There is the language barrier, um, because often what I've seen is that they will search for for the greatest educators that have the greatest impact. So, for example, they work with Michael Fullen, and I do a lot of the translation. Or they've invited Hattie, or they've invited Hargraves. I mean, it's the same type of educators that we also work with, um, but the implementation, from what I've seen in the French, at times can be a little bit. There's obstacles, and but not to say that they're not looking at wanting the best. So they do look elsewhere. And when I say the language barrier, I'm also talking mostly about outside Montreal. And like about 2 months ago, I was up in Rivière du Loup, up in with Michael Fullen, and who they absolutely adore him, and very apologetic because not everybody can speak the language, but it's just an amazing how much he's adored here. Or so even though again there is this language barrier, they do always try to look out for the who's out there. For example, in August, it'll be Jean Clinton, Dr. Jean Clinton, who will be speaking, and it's again we all want the same thing. So there's that, and then I don't know if you heard about the school boards. So the French don't have school boards. They have a centre de service, service centers. So they don't have board of trustees, and it's made up of parents. And it's been, I think, almost 4 years. The English, we still have the school boards, but right now we are in court to keep it.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, so that we're going through that as well.
So is that, when you say that, is that more like you would find in, say, the UK, where it's that's the sort of the structure there, is like schools are a little bit individually, there's an entity there, but there's like a regional, they don't have the same sort of capacity, if you will, that a school board does in terms of being able to support them. It's more of a governance and kind of a overseeing. Is that accurate to describe that system?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's yeah, exactly. I mean, there's still a lot of learning going on, and not to say that by removing the trustees and putting teachers and parents, and it's been easy,
Hmm.
but they're still experimenting with that. I don't know. Actually, I wouldn't say experimenting. It is an effect, but also another something else that they're looking at. It hasn't been made public, but it may or will soon. Is that it is the ministry that will hire um, the director general
Okay.
or
So
the superintendent.
again, as with all these things, there's political elements and
Yeah.
so forth. But speaking as frankly as you can, Michael, would you argue, would you make the argument that the school board system, and again, however, that's a pretty constant concept across North America for sure. Not in other countries, but North America has the school district, school board system. Would you make the argument that that structure is is better than what, say, a UK or Australia or other countries, or francophone Quebec offers? Like, maybe not to say it's better, but what would you say the benefits are of that structure, in terms of like why they're in court right now, what they're arguing for, what their arguments might be that suggest this is actually a better system for kids, or maybe it isn't. I don't know. What I'd just like to
And
hear your
that's a
thoughts
great
on that.
question. And sure, I mean, when we're in education, we always want what's best, not only for the students, but for all of us. And I've only worked as a director general with a school board. And it's not to say that when the government was looking at a different way of doing things, I was looking at the process, and I could not understand how that would be any better. Because initially they said, well, there's a money issue, so by removing the trustees, we'll save so much money. But I have an issue when there's a conflict of interest by adding teachers or educators, parents at a board that are making decision, when I think that people there should be neutral, and it's very difficult to keep that in place. So from my experience and from what I've heard, I believe that the school board system that we have in place is probably the most beneficial for all of us. Um, e- e- Especially when you're a minority. Our school board protects the English and the looking at the whole system, how it functions, and who's hired or not. Um, it's worked very well. Like, obviously, the rights and responsibilities sometimes are blurred, but when we work together, out of the two systems, from what I've heard, um, I think that the school board is probably the most beneficial.
I remember having a conversation with a principal from Alberta a number of years ago, who
Right.
went on a principal exchange to Australia. So he went to Australia for a month, and then that principal came here. And he goes there, and he's had his whole life experience and educational experience within a school district. And he goes there, and he says to principal, he says, "Oh, it must be so awesome because you have total control. Like, there's so much you can do because you're not bound by a board and all of these other sort of
Yeah.
restrictions." And she said to him, she said, "No," she says, "you are so fortunate because you don't have to worry about hiring a caretaker or an administrator. You don't have to worry about all of the administrative stuff. Plus," she says, "you have people who are dedicated to supporting you when you have an issue. You don't have to have all of the expertise on your staff in order to help kids
So
with
true.
special
So
needs or
true.
whatever it
Yeah.
is. So, and it made him realize that when a school district is functioning well, they are supporting you in ways
Absolutely.
and relieving you of duties and things that are essentially not really things you need to be doing. I mean, and you know, we've been working, when I say we, you and I and others have been working for a long time to help principals uh, take more of a role as instructional leaders, right? And
Right.
reduce the amount of administrative stuff that they have to deal
Absolutely.
with so that they can be, you know, working with teachers and supporting them. And yet
Yeah.
it seems like when you now uh, don't have that backing, well, now who's somebody's got to do those things. Somebody has to do those things, and often it now is on the lap of the principal to have to make all of
Absolutely. I
those
mean, the job of
decisions.
the school board is to do all the work that, well, to do all the work so that the teachers and everybody else in the school can do what they need to do. So, I still don't see, things can change, but I still don't
Sure.
see how the new system is beneficial. But I do watch, and I do, I always have my ear on the ground to see how it's going. There's never a quick fix for
Sure.
anything.
Sure.
So yeah, but
Well,
it's
and
working for us.
yeah, and I mean, I guess, you know, you and I are both biased because that's the system we've worked in, and you know, I have, and you probably have more of a context of how it doesn't work. But makes me think about my next question, which is around leadership in general, and
Sure.
thinking about how leadership maybe in your time and your experience has changed, and sort of like how has leadership broadly speaking changed in the last whatever however many years back you want to go, but what do you see leadership changing from and to?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I can have an hour just on that. But when I first went into leadership, and from what I saw, it definitely was a lot more authoritative than it is now. And what's resonating in my mind is what I heard at the CASA conference. Uh, and to me, it really what he said encompasses how we lead, which is, don't ask for your hand until you show me your heart. And I believe that we do lead from the heart. And I always or like when Michael Fullen says, uh, one of the biggest mistakes that leaders make is because they try to be inspirational instead of relational. The relational piece is so much important for the inspiration. And I remember, every year when I would start at the school board, I would have a session with everybody, and I'd say, don't miss my kindness as a weakness, or my directness, or my authoritative as something that means that it will always work. So what I've seen from leadership is, it's those soft skills, that you need to be a team player, you need to listen. Something I heard also at CASA, which I told them that I am going to use it from now on, because it's not, so, sometimes the language is not the same. So this is what I love, the Pan Canadian conferences. And he says, you don't only show your calm as a leader, but you lend your calm.
Mhm.
So I had never heard of that.
That's
And
interesting.
I thought that
Yeah.
was amazing. So, and again, it, it's about the relationship, about being kind, about empowering, about, we're all on the same team. It's about trusting. See, trust to me is a huge one. And well, like when you mentioned before about the school board, well, the school board, the trustees trusted me, and when there's a trust, everything will work. And even as a leader, you have to trust. And so that's, for me, it keeps changing, so much more forward, that I watch very closely, when, like, how far can we go. uh, and it's also interesting that in CASA, one of the guiding questions, besides the synthesizing, I also gave them the difficult questions, being a courageous leadership, right? And I asked two. Well, one had to do with the indigenous, and the other had to do with, this is all great, to work with your team, to listen to them, to trust them, but we know there's times that you have to make a decision, and sometimes you can't wait. So it's that fine line that I always struggled with. And and that's that. See, this is the beauty of, from what I saw of being a critical friend. So then you ask, what are you doing in your, in your district or whatnot? So yeah, I see leadership, uh, leveling, let's say,
Yeah.
with all the team players.
Well, and as I think you so aptly pointed out, I think that the biggest change is just the way in which we view authority as a society in general, right? And there's some negative sides to that as well. I think we look at the relationship that we have with whether it's government or police or whomever that we've lost, and teachers are part of that too, that we've as a society lost a little bit of their authority. At the same time, it's an opportunity, right? To say, okay, so if you're not just going to trust me because I have a nameplate on my office door, uh, then I have to earn it in some way. And so how do I earn it? And so I think what you've described is what great leaders do in order to earn that trust in a way that I think it just makes the experience better, and allows for things like innovation. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is that innovation moves at the speed of trust, right? Like if there's
Yeah,
no you can't do new things
right.
if everybody's questioning and so forth, and the other thing that I think is, and I would love to like, I have all of these ideas of things if I ever go get my PhD thing, research questions, right, that are on my list. And one of them is the impact of like longevity in terms of building that trust, right? Like there are certain school districts where it seems like there's a constant turnover of whether it's principals or superintendents or directors or whatever it is. And like I wonder about that versus ones where people are there and can actually create and earn some of this trust and some of this stuff that takes time, right? Because it's, if you just accept me, I'm just going to tell you what to do, Michael, and you just do it. That's
Yeah,
fast, very fast. You can get a lot of things done, but as we know, that can also lead to a lot of problems when things go. So this is a longer process, but at the same time, the change is so much more lasting and impactful when everybody's felt like I was part of that in some way. Like this wasn't
absolutely.
just
Yeah,
somebody just
yeah.
making a decision that, and boy, but I also know from watching folks like you do this role, like you said, it's a difficult balance. Like I think you're understating the challenge of that. It's very, very hard, and the other thing I wonder too, Michael, is how you sort of
Mhm.
viewed. I mean, you were director in Lester B, which is, um, I is a student population. I always think it at around 50, 60,000, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, it was about 25,000.
25. But I even wonder about just the size of a district and what that means in terms of, like, there's certain people that you have to build relationships with, and
Absolutely.
obviously there's a whole other group of people that you won't because it's just
Yeah,
too large. Like I just wonder even about how you think about the scaling of that, or
yeah.
how that works with different
Yeah, a
sizes.
great question, and also to go back to. By the way, every time I heard you speak, you're an inspiration too. I always watched you speak, and so I wanted to say that. But I agree with you with the innovation. See, to me, I always told them that status quo is not always a good thing, and maybe it shouldn't be an option. And but if you're going to be taking risks, and I would tell that to the principals, then you have to make sure that you support those teachers because they're taking risks, right? And because it's all about the support, and if it's not there, but now I love your question because, see, I've always told everybody that I was first and foremost a teacher. I never thought I'd end where I did. I thought my career was going to end as a teacher, and and I never changed my approach. That to me, everything happened in the classroom, and because nobody wants to hear, oh, how hard I worked, or everybody works hard, and
Sure.
I never said, "Oh, I work so hard," and so I would always go into the schools, and I loved going into the schools. I mean, I'll be honest. I can't say that maybe everybody around me was always in favor that I went into schools because there's stuff to do at the board, but I used to love to go into the schools, and sometimes I would take over and do an exam. I mean, my phone would be dinging because something happened, but unless if the child was not safe, then I would obviously take it. But it's the relationship with the teachers and all the initiatives that happen at Lester B. It's because of the teachers, because they believed in it. They would come. I created a culture of openness. You want to try something? Let's do it. I'm not going to wait for research because by the time research gets there, it's too late. We
Yeah.
can work alongside, but not at the expense of. So when the teachers had an idea, um, I went for it. I spoke to the principal. This is what so that they knew, and so I continued the relationship with the teachers almost till the end. To your point, you're right. I think there were 5,000 educators or staff, and it's impossible, but yet it's not because you go into a school. One of the most important people in this, well, everybody's important, but the caretaker, the administration, the secretary say hi, and they remember that.
Yeah.
So I have to give again the educators a lot of the a lot of the thank yous as to why things happen,
Yeah.
and it's worthwhile to invest that time. I don't think that by taking an hour of your day, it's really going to change everything so much. So that was my approach, and I've always said that I ended my career as a teacher, and that's what I'm first and foremost.
Well, again, I think that that's been evident in your work, and Lester B continues to be. We're still doing work with Lester B in a lot of different capacities, and it's always a pleasure to work with people there. And it just has a, I don't know, just there's a vibe there that that oh, okay, yeah, I think things are happening here, and things. I mean, again, teaching's hard, always going to be hard. That we're never gonna. I don't think we're gonna change that, but yeah, leadership does definitely have that impact.
Yep.
So before I let you go,
Sure.
I got some more little I don't know, less serious, less education focused questions I'm gonna throw your way. And it's always fun to
Sure.
compare as I listen to different people. So
Yeah.
I don't know. What are you currently reading or listening to? Has your reading habits changed since you've retired?
Yeah, I try as much as possible not to read about anything that is too educational. Um, if I do, it'll just be on Twitter, something very quick. But to read a whole
Sure.
book on it, no. I like to, I'm part of one of the benefits of retirement is I'm part of a book club. So I'm
Nice.
reading now The Unbreakable Heart of Olivia Denari, Italian author, which is wonderful. So yeah, once a month I read a book, a podcast, and all that. My boys are trying to get me on it, but I don't have anything necessarily that I always listen to.
Well, this will be one for sure, right?
This is
Or the
for sure. It's already in one of my. It's one of the favorites. So
Are you watching anything for fun? Do you have any sort of guilty pleasures of like, oh yeah, this is my series that I've finished or watched or are watching?
yeah. So I always shock people when I tell them that I just finished watching The Sopranos for the first time, and when you're working and raising family, I didn't do a lot of watching TV, but I absolutely loved it. I finished it uh, 2 days ago, and
Interesting.
I
Well,
feel
you're
like I've
Italian.
I'm Italian. So I have
Oh
this,
yeah.
and I don't know how well this is going to sound, but I've always have had this fascination about the mafia because
Sure.
they're leaders, and they're effective leaders. They're not necessarily nice leaders, but
That's
but
right.
they get like a grade 4, grade 5 education, and
Yeah.
when we were in Chicago, I went to the Al Capone tour or whatever. So
Right.
I like to watch a lot of like I just finished watching also The Offer, which is the
The
making of The
offer.
Godfather. You have
Oh,
to watch.
okay. I will watch that. I
That's
love the
phenomenal.
making of, that's behind the scenes stuff. But so I didn't watch The Sopranos when it was out, but that became my, for a number of years that's what I watched on the airplane. So that was my little,
Okay.
whenever I was flying, I would
Right.
have a bunch of episodes, and I get that I watched the entire series on an airplane.
Oh
Um
my God.
on
Wow.
I don't remember how long it took me. It was a number of months, obviously, but like I went pretty hard on it. But yeah, I think your point about the leadership, like examining again, like, because leadership, I mean, there's all kinds of leaders we've had, good, bad, or otherwise, but there's
Yeah.
like, what are you learning from the, and one of my great, I'll leave you this little tip
Sure.
or thought. There's a book called The Nine Lies About Work, and one of the lies is that leadership is a thing. In other words, that you can define leadership in terms of, you have to have all these attributes and qualities, and history shows that we've had all kinds of leaders, some charismatic, some not,
Right.
some good, some bad. They said the only measure of leadership is followers. Do people follow you? Are people
Right.
following you? And if they're not
Right.
following you,
Right.
and again, so anyway, that'd be a great one. But yeah, that's
No,
that's that's
it is fascinating, and so I'm always amazed of how these people got to do
yes.
what they did
Right.
and
They didn't
why.
they don't have the
You know?
education you had. They didn't go to school
No,
to learn about it. But they do it
right,
amazingly, amazingly well.
right. So I'm really enjoyed that, and then I also I love Ted Lasso, and so
Yeah.
I've been watching that as well.
So you mentioned the Al Capone tour. So
Yeah,
if you're ever coming through Moose Jaw, we have an Al Capone tour. I don't know if you
I've
know the
heard.
history.
Yes,
Yes,
about the bridge
tunnels.
tunnel, the tunnel. I have to
That's
come.
right. Yes, it's there, and we have some other ones as well. So and at this
Okay,
point, like, nobody knows if it actually is true, but like, we're going with it. Yes, he was here and he went back and forth. So it's a fact whether
right now. How close are you from to the tunnel?
oh, like 2-minute drive that way.
Oh my God. Oh
Yeah,
wow,
so
I would love.
we've done them. My daughters, actually, two of my daughters, during high school, were like actors in this,
Right.
the whole experience. So it's
Right.
been part of our, it's kind of part of the lore. All right,
Mhm.
last question, and I say that because that's a very sort of well known attraction for Moose Jaw. Now, if you're coming to Montreal, like, there's no shortage of amazing things, and everybody understands all of the wonderful things that can happen and do. And I've been to Montreal a number of times. But if someone's coming and saying, like, here's a thing that probably is not going to come up in the top search of things to do in Montreal, but it's something that maybe is a lesser known thing that you would say people should check out, what would that be?
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to mention, the jazz festival and the comedy festival.
Yeah.
I live in the western part of the island, so we're about 30 minutes away from Montreal. The west part of the island is absolutely amazing. We have the Pointe-Claire village, which is so quaint, and then we have the Saint Anne locks. Um, Take a drive by the lakeshore in the West Island. It is absolutely, to us, it's a hidden gem. So
Okay.
recommend that get away from the downtown and all the touristy spots and come west, and you'll see some amazing places.
Definitely now on my
Yeah,
list
and
of
we're all
next time I'm in
bilingual.
Montreal.
I mean, in Montreal, it's not an issue. We all
Sure.
speak English and French. It's not a problem.
Yes. Awesome. Well, Michael, I appreciate your time. This was great catching up with you, and appreciate your insights. And I wish you all the best as you, not really retired, but just live. You're on a different path right now.
Absolutely. Somebody told me that retirement is about choice. So that's what I'm doing.
Absolutely. Good to
Yeah.
talk to you.
A pleasure.